Hi, friends and family,
Welcome to Hope After Addiction
with your hosts, Katie Comer.
and Chelsea McLeod.
Hi, welcome to Hope After Addiction. We are so happy that you've joined us this morning or this evening, whenever you're watching this. It's morning for us, so I said that.
Yeah, middle of the night for you maybe,
Maybe.
but
Yeah, it may be.
Yeah.
But yeah, how are you?
I am doing good. How are you?
I'm tired.
Yeah?
Yeah, I told you.
I said, tell me the story. She saved it for y'all.
I saved it for you.
Yeah.
I didn't tell her before we.
Yeah.
So last night, Elle and I, my daughter, she's 7, we went to TPAC for the Broadway show.
Is this the Frozen one? I had a client tell me about this last night. How was it?
Let me tell you, it was beautiful. They did such a good job. So I've been to a Broadway show before. Ella's never seen one.
Yeah.
Loves Frozen, obviously. And it was such the sweetest time with her. If I could just like put my camera on her face
Yeah.
the whole time and just like rewatch her face. She was like this. The whole time.
I can see her, those sweet eyes.
I know. And I was a little nervous because the start time for the show was 7:30.
Oh my goodness.
And it was 2 hours and 15 minutes.
So what time did y'all get home?
10:30.
Oh my
And
goodness.
then I had to put her to bed, and then I was already past my bedtime by the time we got home. And so anyway, I'm tired, but it was so worth it. And she loved it, and she was telling Adam all about it this morning and singing all the songs. It was just the sweetest.
She'll never forget that either.
She'll never forget it.
It was worth the late night.
Yeah, I mean, there were times that I like teared up in it because they was so good.
Really?
Yes, there was like obvious the big moment
Yeah.
when Elsa changes out of her, queen outfit into her Elsa Frozen outfit.
Yeah.
And they do she hits this high note and then it rips off and she reveals this like really sparkly like dress and she's hitting this high note. And then it goes black and then it's intermission and everybody's like, yes! And it was so awesome.
That's so
It was so
sweet.
good. And Ella was like, how did they do that? And I was like, it's magic. It's such a magical thing.
That's so much fun.
So
I love
it
that.
was so good. Next year, if they come back, she has to wear her Elsa outfit, she said, because all the little girls there wearing their Elsa outfits.
Were
And
they?
She has one, and I didn't even think about it. But
I wouldn't have.
anyway,
What
it
a
was
fun
good.
night.
It was such a fun night.
Yeah.
Late night, let them sleep in a little bit this morning.
Yeah.
And I wish I could have done the same, but I had to get ready.
Yeah. Early bedtime tonight.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway,
Oh, how
Some
much
story.
fun. I love that. Sweet memories.
it's sweet memories.
Speaking
So,
of, yeah.
speaking of memories, I guess. Today we're going to be talking about. So a long time ago, we did an episode of what would you tell your 21-year-old self? Well, today we're going to tell what would you tell your 30-year-old self. So for me, just to give you an idea of where that looks like in my life, is I'd already found out about Adam's addiction.
Yeah.
And he was already working at S2L. So this is kind of after. Yeah. This is kind of after like all the meaty stuff, of all the really, really hard stuff. But it's still been like 11 years. And so there's a lot that's happened,
Yeah.
whether it's addiction, other stuff, So I have a few things that I would tell myself. Where does
Yeah.
that put you?
I was actually just thinking, I was like, where is that math? So the ironic thing I just realized is I dropped John off at S2L, our sister ministry, and got on a flight for Portugal 2 days later for my 30th birthday. I just realized that. So 30 was a pivotal time for me in that.
A difficult time.
Very difficult time.
Yeah.
He still will not look at Portugal pictures. He's very bitter towards that because he was so mad because it was supposed to be our trip, and I was like,
Well.
but I also felt like 30 was that new lease on life. Like 20s were such a mess. And it's the years, the decades of like, you can make mistakes and it's forgivable and all the things. And so 30, I was like, okay, I was more grounded in who I was. But I was also entering into this crazy season of addiction. And I had been walking that for about a year already with him. So in the 30s. I'm 36 now, and it's been a really, really sweet, trying, teaching decade.
So,
Yeah.
what would we tell our 30-year-old self? My first thing, I'll go ahead and say, is to embrace the waiting and embrace it, because there is a lot of growth that comes in the waiting. In my 30s, there was a lot of waiting in different scenarios. Infertility was one of them. We both had to deal with that. But there was such a growth that happened with Adam and I when I would have had it a different way, and had it 2 or 3 years before that. The amount of growth that Adam and I had as a couple was beautiful. Adam was like a 3-man team when he first started working at
so crazy
at S2L. He was like 30 and there was 3 of them. And what I would tell myself there is that the waiting to I think he was making like $50 a week.
Right. We still have the first paychecks
Yeah,
we weren't even back as far as y'all were.
Yeah. He was like making like $50 a week. And so waiting for God's provision and trusting the Lord in that, and the amount of growth that it took, like that happened. I worked full time, obviously, because $50 a week didn't even cut his driving to Woodbury. And so just like the waiting game there of like, God, what's the plan here? You know? And how beautiful, like there's 30 or so staff
It's
now.
insane.
And so just the beautiful growth, physically, yes, in the ministry, but just between us two, and what it took for us just to lean on each other in that time. But I would just tell myself at 30, now I'm 41. Yeah, I'm 41.
Are you?
And yes, girl.
I thought you were still 40.
Oh, just out of my 30s still.
That's right. Barely, just a little bit.
I'm 41 now, so my whole 30s, there was different seasons of waiting just for different things. And just telling myself, just really be looking at what growth this is, and what, how is this really stretching your faith, and just embrace it. Embrace that growth. It's hard to do in the middle of it. But just know that God's working. So that's my first one.
It's funny. I have embraced in my first one too.
Really?
I do.
We don't talk about this stuff.
We don't. It's just a surprise for both of us. But my first one is: the valleys are the sweet spot. The mountaintops are just to see how far you've come. Embrace them both, because they are both pivotal in your life. And I think about my life and all the trials and the traumas and the hardships and everything I went through. I was constantly trying to get out of the valley. Constantly just trying to like flee it. Run from it, from our last episode.
Go back and watch it.
And I learned, as Papa taught me, that the valleys are where, and I've talked about this a couple of times, but like your shade and your food and your water and your rest. And there is so much life-changing things that happen in the valley. And that's what grows you.
To embrace the valley.
To embrace it instead of fight to get out of it. Like, embrace that rest, embrace the slowdown, embrace the tough times, embrace the wait, because that valley a lot of times is your wait.
That's true.
Like in the visual, like you're driving through a valley and it's a long, and embrace that. And so the mountaintops are just where you climb to see where you've come from and where you've been. And, the question I had to ask myself is, how much more could I have learned if I wouldn't have fought the valley so hard? And, you can't go back and change that. But if I would have embraced those valleys and the food that God was trying to give me, how much more could I have grown if I would embrace those valleys? And so it's been a huge lesson. And I don't even remember when Papa taught me about the valleys and the mountaintops. But to know that I, even looking back, even to addiction, even to infertility, that weight, those are my sweetest times with Jesus. And so I just would tell myself to embrace them both, because they're both pivotal in your life, both of them. Because it's important to climb, even now, like giving birth to a son, and to look at Jasper and to remember, like we just had Mother's Day, and to remember where that yearn for came from, and to hold a miracle child in my body that I never thought I would get to have. That's the mountaintops that we get to look back down on and praise God for the valleys and the weight, you know.
I just had a question. It's kind of off subject, but
It's okay.
is Papa, was he a writer? Okay. Because she's such a beautiful writer. I don't know if you
Thanks, friend.
follow her on socials or anything, but she, and you have a blog
Thanks.
too.
I do.
And so, what is it called?
faithformiracles.org.
Yeah,
Yep.
she's a beautiful writer. So if
Thank
you
you,
ever
friend.
want to go look at her blog, her posts, I was just curious when you were talking about him. I'd never asked you, maybe knew a little bit, but he was a writer.
He was a writer. He wrote devotions and
That's right.
studies.
That's
And
right.
it's
I
funny.
did
I
remember
meant to
that.
actually bring one today for one of our podcasts, but he is. And that's where it comes from. Mama's a writer. Papa's a writer.
Okay.
And so it just kind of comes down
Okay.
the line.
Yeah, because Papa is her dad. Okay.
Yep. Yes, my sweet Papa.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay.
What's your next?
My next one is God's. If I were to tell myself at 30, going back there, and I could just whisper something, is God's got your story already written. Relax.
That's good. That's
Just-
good.
Take a chill pill.
Yeah.
I think sometimes I don't really deal with anxiety, thankfully. But there are moments in my life in my 30s where I would just get overly anxious about something and the way that my story was unfolding.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, I don't understand that you've already brought us through this addiction stuff, because at 30, we had already gotten kind of past it. I mean, we were still dealing with some trust stuff, maybe early 30s.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of stuff throughout my 30s that I'd be like, but you've already like made me go through
Right.
really hard stuff. So let's like not do that anymore.
Yes. I'm done.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
But if I could just like whisper to myself at 30 saying, God's got your story written, relax. He's got you. He's got you in the palm of his hand, and your story at 41 is going to be more beautiful than you could have ever imagined. It doesn't look like anything you imagined,
No.
but it is more beautiful
Yeah.
than you could have ever imagined. And just because it doesn't look like what you thought it was, he's got your story written. Relax.
It's so good, because I think in our 20s, I know with me, I was so like this with my life.
Yeah.
Control, control, control.
Yeah. It had to be somewhat, I feel like, I mean,
Yeah.
not really, but like,
Yeah, you don't know,
Yeah.
you know, but
Hold on for
through
dear
the
life,
waiting,
yeah.
through the trials, you learn to release those hands and let God control and relax, to
Yeah.
know that like no matter what happens, God is in control. And so it's a really good one, because you can relax at that point when you know that God is in control and we're not.
yeah. And I'm trying to think of ways to encourage you, because it's easy enough for us just to say, hey, this is what you need to tell yourself in your 30s, is just relax. But I think things that helped me in my journey of just realizing that was obviously the Bible,
Yeah.
really leaning into what it says, but also having like an accountability group to really speak truth into me.
Oh, yeah.
And people in your life to really even say sometimes the hard stuff. Have you prayed about that? What do you think, God's teaching you in this? And really kind of testing you in that. And so having an accountability group really helped me in my 30s.
Yeah. It's
So.
imperative.
Yeah.
Imperative. I think my next one would be trust exactly who God has made you to be and don't strive to be anything different. And I think that's a big comparison from the 20s decade to the 30s because I spent so many years in my 20s, one, trying to figure out who I was, which I think we all do, but two, trying to change who I was because I didn't trust God for who he had made me to be. And I used to think because I was introverted or because I was shy or not as outgoing that I was weird and I should be something different, but that's exactly who God made me to be. And I had to realize in my 30s that it is okay to be all the things that God has made you to be. Your spiritual gifts don't need to be any different than what God has already given you. That's exactly who he made you to be. Your personality type, whether you're introvert or extrovert, there's so many different things, and to embrace that you and I, every person watches this, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. And we say this a lot. Katie can reach different people than I can. I'm a writer. She's a speaker. God made us so uniquely. And you watching this, there is one of you in this entire world. And God made you for that.
Yeah.
And I think if I would have learned to embrace and to be grateful for who God made me to be instead of fighting that, my life would have been so different. And I'm still learning that at 36. I think I always will be, because comparison's a normal human response. But I wish I would have learned that a lot sooner. And it's been one of the greatest gifts to be like, God made you as you, for a specific person. Even for one person that you may run into that needs you and your hope in the gospel, God made you for that and nobody else.
It's good. I think that my other point kind of piggybacks off of that, so I'll just go ahead and say it.
Yes.
But I think when I was early in my 30s, I still was trying to, I'm trying to think of the word, push away what God had done. Is this still a little bit in my early 30s shameful?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I think what I would do and say, kind of piggybacking off of,
Yes.
is not to push away what God had naturally given me, and
That's so good.
speaking about what God has done in my life. Again, it was fairly new in recovery. Adam was fairly new in the recovery, early 30s. So I was still like learning it all. But if I were to go back and tell myself, like, lean into who God's created you to be, lean into that. And that's being, rather outgoing. And I love to speak about, everything that I've gone through. And it took, some time, but just embrace that. And so my point was, one of my last points, but I'll go and say it, was just to jump off that ledge.
Jump off that. Yeah, for sure.
Go and jump off that ledge. And meaning, not really jump off a ledge.
Yes.
But,
Yeah. Yep.
But it means to just like take the leap of faith of what God's called you to do. And so I would tell myself that, and not wait until I was 39 and start a podcast.
Yep.
It took me like 5 years. So I would say, go ahead and speak about it. Speak at churches about your, story.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful story, and how many more people, and I know God has it all under control, and his timing is always better. But I mean, if I would have started in my early 30s, how much more time and more people could I have reached? So that's what I would have said.
Yep.
It's to just take that leap and embrace the person who God's called you to be.
Yep.
And this is our story, and we're sharing it. And this is for such a time as this.
Yes.
Sharing what God's done in our life. So I would have done it earlier.
Yep. And I think that's so important, because in the beginning I did the same thing where we would hide what we had been through shame. Yeah. But like the name Katie Comer and Chelsea McLeod, that is a large chapter in our book.
Yeah.
And so God has called us to use that and to not hide from that, and not to make us this facade of something that we're not, because there's so many people in this world that need our story and our hope. No matter what that ending looked like for you, they need you. There's a mama that needs you. There's a wife that needs you. There's a daughter. There's a son that needs you. And so don't be ashamed of who God has called you to be.
Yeah.
It's funny, those piggyback to each other. I love that.
No, that's so funny.
One of my other ones, big one, and especially lately, but God has put people in your life for a specific reason and will use people to point you to him and to do life with. We talk about fellowship a lot. It's very important. We need people, but when it boils down to it all, Jesus is everything. Mm-hmm. And I spent a lot of time running to people and running to humans for fulfillment, for direction, for everything. And I have learned in this season, even of addiction, but just in trials that we're in currently, that like Jesus is my all. Mm-hmm. And to run to him. You know, and I say it a lot on here, when I stand with Jesus on Judgment Day, I'm by myself. I am called to honor my husband and respect and honor my parents and be kind and all the fruits of the Spirit to this world, but I'm responsible for me. Mm. And I'm responsible for that day when I stand up there with God. It's me and him. It's funny, we were just talking about Papa, but he was my world. I talk about it all the time. He knew everything. I called him about everything. When life was hard, when life was good, he was my person. And then we got the call 2 March mornings ago that he had passed in his sleep. And so it was a complete unexpected thing. And I meant to bring the devotional because it was a crazy God moment. But, you know, I asked, who do I run to now, God? Like who? He was my everything. And so I opened up his devotion for that day that he passed. And the devotion for that day is talking about you run to God for everything. Mm-hmm. No human can ever fulfill what I can. No human can give you the peace that I can. Mm-hmm. So Katie and I talk a lot that fellowship is huge. Accountability is huge. Yeah. But ultimately, God is the end. Mm-hmm. And so it's been a huge lesson that no matter what's in my life, no matter good, bad, ugly, God is who I have to run to. And that's been a wonderful, powerful lesson. Because I ran to people out of pain. I ran to people to fulfill me. And God has really worked on my heart on that. And it's been one of the biggest lessons of my 36 years.
Mm-hmm. That's a good reminder for all of us. Because I think naturally we do. I mean, they're physically
they're
here,
tangible.
Yeah. So
it's so
easy
true.
To do.
Yep.
I think something that I would tell myself at 30 would be to really take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. I think as, you know, I had kids, you know, early 30s, mm-hmm. focused on my marriage. Mm-hmm. And I think naturally as a mom and a wife, we put ourselves on a back burner.
Always.
And so in 10 years, I'll say, what would you tell your 40-year-olds?
That's right.
But I think that I would say stop neglecting mm-hmm. yourself physically and spiritually because you deserve to be seen mm-hmm. and taken care of too. Because, I mean, as a young mom, it's natural. And I think that for all my young moms, that's easy to do is just so mm-hmm. focus on other people. So this season of my 40s is mm-hmm. kind of shifting that. Not that I'm not focusing on my kids, but God's really called me to kind of take care of myself. In this
and we
season.
forget to do that.
We forget to
I'm
do
in
it.
that season because I'm a young compared to, I actually got my hair done while I was home the other week. And
so don't forget yourself.
I do.
It's just hard, though.
I just need you to remind me.
Yeah.
But I cried when she got done. I did. I cried, and my best friend did it, and she's like, so "What's wrong?" And I was like, "I just never do anything for me. Like it just, it feels good." And God wants us, and especially that alignment. That's what I've struggled being a new mom and a young mom is that quality, intimate time with God that I used to have all the time because I'm an older mom. And it's finding that still, and it's a different season. And God still meets us in the dishes. He still meets us in the laundry. You know, like you said, praying over the socks. You know.
Yeah.
So, I will say my next, and I had more. Like we could go on forever. I feel like with lessons,
we could do a part 2.
We could because they're so good. But my most recent one, I would say that God's been working on my heart is you don't have to work for God's love. He loves you, just as you are, just as broken as you are, just as messy as you are. And for so long, having a father that left, I have always worked for God's love and thought that I had to be something or do something. And I'm learning that he loves me for me, and there's nothing I could do to change that. And it took me having children, I think, to realize God's love because I never understood fully.
Yeah.
So whoever's listening, he loves you no matter where you're at, no matter how messy you feel. He loves you.
No matter what you've done.
Yep.
It's a good reminder.
You're not too damaged. Yes, ma'am.
My last one.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, and I kind of even mentioned it in my previous one about God's got your story written, but it's going to be okay. If I could just go back and just whisper every little thing that happened in my 30s, God says it's just, I would just whisper, it's going to be okay. And you're going to be fine. And there's nothing too big for God.
Yep.
And he has ordained whatever's going on because he wrote your story.
Yeah.
And so I would just whisper that, and I would just be like, Katie, you're going to be fine.
You're going to be okay.
And your life is beautiful.
It is. And I want to end with this, and I've talked about it on here before, but I had a counselor that did a visual with me one time, and he asked me to close my eyes, and he said, think of you as a little girl. And so you do this, you as a little girl, little boy, wherever you were, what were you doing at 5? And he said, and then I want you to go to middle school. What would that middle school girl tell that little girl? And then go to high school. What would that little girl tell that little girl or little boy? And then go to wherever you are today. What would you as a 30-year-old woman, a 50-year-old man, what would you go and tell your childhood self today? And it's like Katie said, it's one of the things, you're going to be okay. You're going to make it. God has big plans for you. And walk through that and the hurt of your past and of every year that you've ever been through, and go back and tell that little child, you are going to be okay.
It's beautiful.
And make it through and work through that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we hope that you have listened to this podcast and felt encouragement about where you're at in your life. You might, like she said, you might be 50, you might be 60 listening to this because you have a loved one in some sort of program. We hope that you found some encouragement that God's got your story. It's going to be okay. Yeah. And that you can just whisper that to yourself. And so we hope that you felt encouraged. We are on Instagram and Facebook at Hope After Addiction. If you ever want to private message us anything that you would love us to cover, you can also email us at hopeafteraddiction@gmail.com and message us there. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe to it so that you kind of know when we release our other episodes. But we hope you have a great day, and we cannot wait to see you next week. Bye-bye.